It was another excellent weekend of hurling. Galway are out, Kilkenny are out, and we've got an All-Ireland final, repeated a Munster final, coming up between Limerick and Waterford in a couple of weeks' time. Brought to you by urgaretro.com. If you want to get these jerseys, that retro Galway one that Michael Verney has, this retro Waterford one, go to urgaretro.com and put in the promo code OurGame. What did you make of that weekend of hurling, Michael?
Ash was unreal. The Saturday night game between Waterford and Kilkenny couldn't help but warm the heart almost. And you're looking, it was a couple of different WhatsApp groups, and even looking on Twitter. This isn't a game at half time, and then all of a sudden, it has to be one of the best halves of hurling ever done by a team in a big game. It was absolutely outstanding, and I have a little Kilkenny bias, as you well know. But at half time, even though Waterford were 7 down, I was kind of thinking they pierced holes through Kilkenny at different stages in the first half. Their touch was off, a couple of different things were off, but the writing was definitely on the wall, and everything just stuck then in the second half. And they really went for the throat with Kilkenny. They really just went after them in that second half, and realistically, after 55 minutes, the game was, you were feeling that the game was nearly over after 55, 60 minutes, unless Kilkenny were able to produce some sort of a rabbit out of a hat like they have before. But that was, Saturday night was unreal. Yesterday was more of an arm wrestle and a tense struggle, whereas Saturday night was just unbelievable.
What did you find, that I was in at Croke Park, did you find that the Limerick-Galway game comparatively was a little bit of a letdown? It felt to me a bit of a drab affair, even though it was really tight, and even going into injury time at the end of the game, Galway got themselves level. 75th minute, obviously there was lots of extra time because of Joe Canning's injury, but 23 each, and yet at the same time, it never quite had the energy of Waterford against Kilkenny.
No, it didn't, but did you get that element of fear? I thought there was, both teams were, particularly Limerick, were so almost fearful of being knocked out again at this stage after all the great work that they've done. It would have been a bit of a disaster if they'd been beaten at semi-final again. Last year we were heralding them as the best team in the championship. They didn't win the championship. They could have easily been the best team in this year's championship and not won the championship again and been knocked out yesterday. So I kind of think Limerick were kind of just holding on. Things happened in that game that don't normally happen in Limerick games. They forced goal chances, I think. David Reedy had a really bad wide, and Tom Morrissey, who was brilliant, had a really bad wide in the second half when the game was in that kind of melting pot. And it's just, things happen that you don't normally see happen with Limerick. And I don't know if that was a bit of fear as well. Galway were only hanging on, but Limerick were kind of hanging on in a different type of way and just willing the finishing line to come.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Maybe Limerick were hanging on mentally, emotionally, whatever you might way you want to look at it, whereas Galway more so physically. I think there was different holes in that sort of Galway team. A couple of players, you don't really want to slate any lads by name necessarily. We'll get on to different pointers about different lads, but I think they were sort of trying to paper over a certain amount of cracks, and over the course of the game Limerick exposed them somewhat, and it was probably towards the very end of the game that you could see Galway tire out, that the mistakes started coming in. Limerick brought on a few lads who got their scores, like Adrian Breen got a point. Now he could have ran it in and maybe there was a goal there for Limerick, and I think there probably was. Peter Casey came in and he was hugely influential between winning balls, setting up scores and knocking over two himself. Whereas Galway, as they had against Tipperary, sort of ran the bench a little bit, and they got a bit of a bounce from it because I thought Fintan Burke came on and he improved the situation in the half back line. I thought Adrian too, he did okay, and I thought Evan Nyland come in and certainly made an impact as well. But it was towards that latter end of the game, the puck outs broke down, and Éanna Murphy is going to get a fair bit of focus, and it's his maiden season in there, and it's a tough place to be. I do think it's a tough place to be, but if you're going to survive at the very, very top level, those puck outs have to go through an eye of a needle, and especially if you were going to play with a seventh man at the back, as Pádraig Mannion was for the vast majority of this game, you're going to be playing with five forwards. So if the half back line you're against is Diarmaid Byrnes, Declan Hannon, Kyle Hayes, with Darragh Donovan, Will O'Donoghue, Hegarty and Morrissey coming back, it's going to be hard for you to win primary puckouts. And I don't really think Galway managed much, if any of that. I can't think of anyone snapping a puck out. So,
did you not think it was interesting, Shane, that you could actually see, it's the first time I've actually seen four in the full back line for I don't know how long. There was actually four of them standing across the 21, and that forced Limerick to push three up. But I just thought they would have made more use of the sweeper from the puck out and tried to place him on contested puckouts. Now, fair play to Limerick, they kind of cut that off a bit. But rather than Pádraig Mannion standing there in the full back line for the puckouts, maybe he could have went out to the half line. Maybe if he went out to the half line, that would have forced Limerick to push up a bit more and maybe would have given them more of an option on a puck. I just thought that was a bit strange.
Yeah, it's a tough one too when you're the lesser of the two teams athletically. I mean, there's no getting away from it. There are a few guys in that Galway team whose very best years are probably past them. They're still good players, but they're probably not at that very top level anymore. I did find that, yes, Éanna Murphy had to go for some of those high-risk ones, but they didn't come off. And you can't ignore that. And it is costly, and it cost him a few points. And his rash decision against Richie Hogan in the Leinster final was costly as well. So you can't ignore that. You don't want to slate a guy. He has to take on very high-risk sort of puckouts because you're playing with the 5 forwards and you have to go short. There's a few times where they went wrong on him, and he did a 1-2 with Sean Loftus from a puck out at one stage, and then his next strike then got blocked down and it almost ends up in a goal. To be fair to him, he made a nice save. Well, he made a couple of nice saves. The one from Reedy especially. I think Reedy has no excuse but to absolutely lift the net out of it with that one. He missed 1-3 when he came on, by the way. And he made an okay save from Seamus Flanagan, and the rebound from Kyle Hayes. It was a scuffed rebound. So he did some things that were good, but you just can't ignore it. But anyway, those last couple of minutes, 76th minute, he did a puck out short to Aidan Hart. Aidan Hart looked really tired at that stage, and I can only imagine the pressure you're under back there. He turned and sort of, I think, a tired strike which Peter Casey intercepted. Breen scored. 78th minute puck out that Tui could have put his hurley up to take down to himself. Like it wasn't a puck out on the money, but I still think if the hurley is within range of your stick, you should probably bring it back to yourself. Tom Morrissey gets a point, and then towards the very end, Galway have a puck out. They work it across the back line. They're 2 points down. They work it back across, and some would say lamp it up the field. But then they had the problem with winning that primary ball. But anyway, Aidan Hart hit an awkward slow ball to Loftus, who had his back to his own goal and facing his own goals. And he gets turned over by Hegarty, win a free. So an awful lot of this is like Galway, I think partly physically, they just kind of broke down towards the end of the game. And, Gifton scores through simple turnovers, through the puckouts, whatever it might be. Maybe just some of the issues with Galway came home to roost in what was their third game in 3 weeks. And they're very different to Waterford. Waterford have the majority of their players are in their mid-20s, playing every week won't bother them. But there's a couple of guys in that Galway team where it would bother them after 3 weeks. Yeah,
the only thing to say about the puckouts is a couple of times Murphy was probably let down by the touch of the guys he was passing the ball to. Yeah. So it's easy to blame the goalkeeper. Another thing as well is people. I understand there was definitely a couple of puckouts that went astray, but people can't have it every way as well. So they were putting ball down top of the half-hour line. They weren't winning it. Yet people don't want him to give away short puckouts, but they don't want him to hit the ball long as well when Limerick have more bodies around it. So it is a tricky one. They're obviously playing that's the system, that's the style that they're trying to play. Particularly with a sweeper there, they're going to be down bodies up front. I think it's funny. The goal in the first half, Graham Mulcahy, I think 9 times out of 10, Graham Mulcahy picks up that ball and puts it in the net, and that was kind of probably symptomatic of Limerick throughout. It was just weird kind of things happened, weird things where Galway probably had no right to be in that game after the 75th minute.
Wasn't it strange? They scored 10 points overall, and somehow they were level in injury time. It felt like a 3-point hammering, even though they were level in injury time.
Yeah, and I kind of said after the 18 final that was a 1-point hammering, and they were well ahead. They always had them at arm's length yesterday. I think it was more Limerick's failings that they weren't able to kick on. There was so many times where that's why there was definitely fear there. It felt like they were hanging on. They were just winning the finish line, because a lot of things happened that just don't typically happen in Limerick games. When they get goal chances, they're usually, sometimes they don't create goal chances, but usually when they do, they're usually quite efficient with them. As you said, David Reedy coming on, that bounce off the bench. I know John Kiley remarked that the bench played well, and David Reedy was one of the players that Damien Lawler said came on and did well. He could have killed off the game for them, and he didn't. That could possibly cost him his introduction in the All-Ireland final. But like the puck outs thing was definitely an issue, all right, and it's something that Murphy will get an awful lot better with experience with that. But Limerick definitely left Galway in the game, and they'd be lucky. I'd say they were happy leaving yesterday evening, that they were in the final, and that they just had that maybe monkey off their back. They're back in the final for the first time since they won it, obviously 2 years ago.
Yeah, because Galway keeping in the game in the first, 15-13 at half time. 3 of their scores had come from sideline cuts, and they were ridiculous sideline cuts from Joe Canning. He made it look so easy. It's almost ridiculous. It almost doesn't look right the way he cuts it over with such ease. But they were all brilliant, and then he added a 4th one after the break, and then Fintan Burke actually added a 5th as well. Did you ever see the bait of it?
No, and when Fintan Burke is stepping up, you're kind of just thinking, oh, don't take it on. There's no way you can score 5 sideline cuts. You're not Joe Canning. And then he puts over an outrageous line ball, having just missed a line ball by about 5 yards, maybe 10 minutes before that. Canning, that's the first time, obviously, anybody has scored 4 sideline cuts in a championship game. I thought it was interesting when you look back at it. Other guys that have scored sideline cuts. Michael Maroney of Clare in the 1977 Munster first round v Tipperary. Like, Jesus, like nearly 43 years ago, scoring 3 line balls with that big heavy ball with a small boss and probably a small enough heel on the hurl. And then Martin Storey got 3 against Kilkenny in the 1993 Leinster final. But like, to score 4 points, not the first time Canning has scored 4. He scored 4 in the Fitzgibbon Cup final in 2008. I saw Shawnee Tobin had it up on Twitter there. A couple of people again saying, I know with a comment in saying, like, should a sideline be worth 2 points? And the added caveat was, should a sideline scored from outside the 45 be worth 2 points? What do you think?
No, and definitely not, because you'd have a situation where lads are practicing sidelines endlessly to make sure that outside the 65 or 45 or whatever stipulation you want to put to it, that they're practicing them endlessly, and we end up with just a sideline take competition in games, and you'll have games won and lost regularly on, did that ball hit that guy's foot on the way out over the sideline or the other guy's? And no matter which way it goes, the team has a sideline now from midfield, and they might cut it over and win the game. Like, do you remember Waterford playing Clare at Walsh Park in the 2019 Munster Championship, and there was that ball that went out over the sideline at the end, and it went against Waterford, and maybe if they had got the ball and knocked over a sideline or been able to retain possession, they could have won the game. So the idea that this would be, you'd have 2, and it happened, I'm not sure, can't remember the name of the Galway Camogie player that did a couple of them recently towards the end of the game. So it does happen, and I think it's obviously great skill, but I just think the idea of a possible kind of contested ball where the linesman isn't sure who it was for, that those would start being worth 2 points. It's already fairly harsh when it's worth 1 point against you if it's been a contested call. But the idea of 2, just not worth it. Like, we all want to see skillful things. Sidelines are lovely, but they shouldn't be deciding games.
It's an unbelievable skill. My problem with it, 2 points would be, it's not usually a mistake why the ball goes out over a sideline. It's usually a good piece of defending, or a flick or a block or something like that. So to punish a guy potentially, just say I blocked you down along the Hogan stand sideline, a great block when you were trying to hit a ball inside and potentially set up an attack, and then all of a sudden I could end up being punished 2 points for that. The only thing I will say, it would make it, it probably would change the way hurling was played a bit. I think teams would start going a lot, would start using width a lot less, for the fear that you could potentially poke a ball out over the sideline and potentially give away 2 points for trying to set up an attack.
Or I could start getting the ball running up the sideline and sort of intentionally just flick it off you as you're coming.
Like that kind of inviting a tackle on you. Go on, knock the ball out. Yeah, potentially, yeah.
And this is the thing with certain rules, you're kind of inviting almost the ludicrous. And when you look at VAR in soccer, which is obviously a very, very different sort of thing, there are times when they're pausing the screen and measuring a lad's armpit against another lad's toe, and it just gets to the level of being ridiculous. In theory, 2 points for a sideline, that sounds lovely. In reality, you're going to end up with nonsense. So, just the only thing I will say, last thing I'll say on it, that camera angle that RTE had from the Cusick stand in the first half, when someone is hitting a line ball, they just need to keep that angle. We don't want to be looking at the umpire to see whether the ball has gone over the bar. It's the most perfect camera angle. It's absolutely beautiful to look at. And I think eventually we want those sort of wireframe, or those cameras that are up on wires, and you would have seen it come in the Six Nations. I think the first place to use it was at the Parc de France, where they come in behind the kicker, the cameras on wires, and maybe they can use drones now. Sure, look, they have all these new things these days, it's hard to keep up. But just the camera behind the kicker in the rugby, if they had that behind the striker in both Gaelic football and in hurling when they're taking frees, and again maybe even sidelines as well, I think that would look pretty slick. But I'd say it would be waiting a while for that to happen just yet. Seeing as we're talking about sideline, a big incident out at the sideline before half time was Gearoid Hegarty's strike on the back of Joe Canning as he's trying to knock a ball up the field. What did you make of that? Was it a red card?
Gearoid Hegarty on Canning, yeah. I don't think it was even a yellow card, to be honest with you.
It had to be a yellow card. Who tries to hook by swinging like that? You hook by sticking the hurley in like that and trying to. You don't swing to hook.
Listen, it's probably not. It's not great. It's not great looking when you slow it down. Don't think anybody would have seen it even in normal time, and that's kind of what a lot of things in hurling, when you're slowed down, it's very easy to say, oh, that's potentially a red card. I don't think he was. I still don't think he was striking with any intent. This minimal force kind of rule, apparently, like that is technically a red card when you're striking with minimal force. He obviously swung in around like that. The only thing I'd say about Hegarty as well, Hegarty for a forward plays more on the line than any other forward I've probably seen. Like, how many frees? He must have given away 5 frees yesterday, at least. 4 or 5 frees that were even scored as well. He tends to come down. He tends to chop down a good bit as well. Okay, I'll contradict myself. It was a yellow. There is not a month of Sundays where something like that should be a red card, though.
No, I don't think it was a red card either. And I had a few people on Twitter say to me that they thought it was a definite red. And at that stage, I was at the game, so I didn't see a replay, and I was working. So it wasn't until later that I got a chance to look at the replay. And I did think that tackle is over the line. I don't think that tackle should get away with nothing. But definitely a yellow and almost an orange, because just the manner of it. And I know I've said it already, but you do not do that to hook somebody. It just makes no sense. You try and as quickly as possible shove it in forward like that, get it in under, behind the arm or whatever. So to me, that's why I sort of don't just let this go and say, this just kind of happens. Nobody tackles like that.
If the ball is in front and he's swinging like that, and he's in or around the ball, as Christy Ring said, when you can't see the ball, you pull where you think the ball is, then it's probably not great either, but he's making an attempt to hit the ball. He was probably about 2 feet away from where you would have your hurl for a hook, and the technique was he was never going to hook Canning like that. And obviously you saw the mark on Canning's back as well, but I think Hegarty will probably be fairly closely looked at coming into the All-Ireland final. And I think teams, when they don't have the ball, will, if Gearoid Hegarty is in front of me, he does tend to foul an awful lot. And I think, I've said it to you before, I said it in the previous show as well, like Limerick's tackling technique is fairly ferocious, but the way hurling has gone now, they give away an awful lot of frees, and they did that yesterday as well. And they were keeping Galway in the game with some of their kind of, it's really borderline tackling, really borderline tackling. I think Waterford went after that in the third quarter of the Munster final. I think they'll go after it again in the All-Ireland final. But not a red, but not nice either.
I think it was a yellow on a bit. But as we're talking about Gearoid Hegarty, he just gave a monstrous performance throughout, but certainly in that first half. And Joseph Cooney, who had been very good against Tipperary in certain parts, he really struggled here, and he was moved into the forward line in the second half. Tom Morrissey over at the other side, 5 points from play and a free at the end. He gave Shane Cooney an awful time of it, and it was that half forward line for Limerick that decided this game, because it's 3 points only from their inside line. Graham Mulcahy was taken off without scoring. Aaron Galland did a couple of nice things, as he always does, but when those balls went in 50-50, I think Daithí Burke came out on top an awful lot of the time. There'd be a few...
He looked very relaxed, Shane, on the ball, didn't he? Very relaxed.
A couple of people put in comments about that, and even stronger comments than saying he looked relaxed. Seamus Flanagan got 2 points, and probably could have had a goal as well if he had to strike that one that Éanna Murphy saved a little bit better. But it was that half forward line, wasn't it, that really decided this game. Hegarty with 4, Cian Lynch. Now, he was playing centre forward, but he was always kind of moving around. And this is, when I say there's holes and mismatches in that Galway team, Gearoid Hegarty lining up against Cian Lynch, especially if you're going to be under a lot of pressure and you're going to have a sweeper behind you, which means you've only got 5 forwards in front of you that are trying to pressurise the ball against a Limerick team that is patient, able to move the ball around, and for the most part are able to get past you in a one-on-one situation. Gearoid McInerney is going to be left chasing shadows against someone as elusive as Cian Lynch. And Lynch didn't score in the first half, he got 2 in the second. But it was just like pulling them apart a little bit all the time. So that half forward line, when the full forward line was struggling, maybe somewhat to do with Pádraig Mannion being sweeper, it was all about that half forward line.
Yeah, we bigged up the half forward line before the Munster final and they were quiet. And the full forward line was the line that did the damage. And then maybe some of the talk was about the full forward line, and the 2 boys in particular, the 2 boys in the wing absolutely went to town. And could have had, like Gearoid Hegarty had a couple of bad enough wides as well. But as he added that to his arsenal, Shane, even this year, you wouldn't have seen him probably 2 years ago striking even from 80 or 90 yards, but he can kind of do it effortless enough now. And interestingly enough, I think Limerick probably realised after the first quarter that they weren't going to be able to hurt Galway as much inside, that it was, the way, and it's funny how you just adapt as games are going on. I'm sure it happened after the first water break where Kinnerk and Cody said to them, we're not going to be able to hurt them inside as much. There's a numerical disadvantage in there. We need to take points from out the pitch. All of a sudden, Dermot Burns comes up with 2, Hegarty comes up with 4, Tom Morrissey comes up with a similar amount as well. So they can kind of beat you every way. If you go straight up 15 on 15 with them, I'm sure there would have been way more ball going inside to Gillane and Mulcahy and Seamus Flanagan, but they probably realised that a lot of the time that ball wasn't on, and the fact that they're able to hurt you from out the field, it's another important string to your bow. They can win a game by going for goals and taking you on with pace inside, or they can win a game by striking from distance.
Yeah, 27 points they scored, but it's the 3rd out of 4 games where they haven't gotten a goal. I don't know if that's all. Like, I wouldn't be making too much fuss out of that. They have scored 30 points, and if a team does come out and 30 points per game on average, and if a team does come out and try and play against them without a sweeper, they're going to be hurt, because teams aren't putting up big enough scores against Limerick. It's so hard to do so. And the idea of exposing Barry Nash as a quarterback, right? So his form is very, very good. So the only reason we bring it up is because he is a guy playing out of position. He started off as a wing forward, then wing back, and now he's cornerback. And Dan Morrissey, who was like Burns and like Kyle Hayes, just lording it in the skies, and Hayes in particular was unbelievable at wing back. Just what an athlete. But the idea of trying to expose 2 lads who are, we'll say, out of position in the full back line, it's going to be very hard to do it when they've got a sweeper and when you're struggling to get the ball up in the forward line. Because, like, it's 7 versus 6 in Galway's half of the field. For them to work the ball upfield short and get it to their forwards and try and get into space is a lot more work and more traffic than if you're the Limerick guys who are all athletic and faster than a lot of the Galway forward line. They're able to walk it out an awful lot easier, and they've more space and room within which to move.
100%, yeah. Like you said, like Barry Nash is not a natural cornerback, but you're definitely not going to expose him unless there's someone in on top of him, and all the backs, the Limerick backs, are engaged with someone. He tended to be free a good bit. I thought Dan Morrissey, even with a lot of 50-50 ball that came in yesterday, was really good. He walked out with a lot of 50-50 ball, but you're definitely not going to expose the Limerick defence like that. And just even bringing in Waterford here for a second, I wonder, like, I think Waterford should probably realise that they're probably not going to outpoint Limerick. I'd be surprised if they were able to outpoint them without getting goals. And the only thing you said about Limerick not getting goals, I wouldn't read too much into that, because, as I said, 9 times out of 10, I think Graham Mulcahy would have taken advantage of that. David Reedy or Flanagan or even Hayes coming in on the rebound. It's not as if they didn't create goal chances. Now, they forced them a small bit, but on other days, I think they could have easily ended up with 227. So I wouldn't read too much into the lack of goals.
And what then of some of the Galway players that are a bit more experienced? Davy Burke taken off at half time again. He turns 31 in January, so it's not a case of being too old per se, but he has a lot of miles on the clock, and if he's not starting in the first couple of games, and and that's against Wexford and Kilkenny, if he's then coming on and starting against Tipperary and taking off at half time, and then he's taken off at half time again here, you have to wonder how much does Shane O'Neill fancy Davy Burke in a hurling sense.
I was wondering, Shane, if Galway somehow got over the line, you're kind of thinking, what will their starting team for the final be? Like, how many changes would there be from the semi-final starting team? and where lads were actually starting to the final, because obviously Joe Canning would have been missing. You wouldn't have imagined David Burke would have been starting, Fintan Burke would have been back in, Adrian Toohey probably would have been back in, maybe Evan Nyland would have been on to hit the freeze, Kyle Mannion would have been off. Just with regards to Burke, he's obviously had injury trouble this year. He went travelling last year after Thomas's won the county final and was back for the All-Ireland club semi-final. Obviously the All-Ireland winning captain in 2017. His form over those years is unbelievable. I think he had 4 All-Stars in a row, I think, during those years, or definitely 3 anyway. But it does look like it's a power game now, isn't it, really? And it's the number one thing is, are you athletic enough and can your body stand up to the amount of action it's going to get from a Limerick team? Like Kyle Hayes kind of probably went away from David Burke there at one stage in the first half. Now saying that, Kyle Hayes, I'd hate to see what he'd do to me or you, and he will do that to most people. He will just totally burn people. But that's the way the game is now, particularly as a half forward. If you're not getting up and down the line like that, you're not really going to be able to play that role. He obviously moved from the midfield role. We haven't really seen him in midfield this year, maybe for the few minutes when he came on against Kilkenny. But yeah, you'd wonder maybe about him. And you know, I know we had a comment in as well there, like asking should Joe Canning retire, which is a very, very interesting question here, and I'm sure we'll go into it in detail. He went off yesterday. It was an awful hit. He probably couldn't have ran into a worse person, and that was in his own teammate, in Joe Cody, one of the biggest, strongest fellas on the field. Thankfully, there was no neck injury or anything like that. It just seems like he was concussed, and obviously badly concussed at the time. But what do you think now? Like his body of work, and we went through it a few weeks ago when we compared him with Seamus Callan. His body of work throughout his career is absolutely phenomenal. But do you think he'll stay on with Galway next year and over the next couple of years?
Yeah, well, he's just turned 32 years of age recently, and there's a few players like that in that age bracket. You know, Patrick Horgan, you wouldn't be talking about him retiring. You wouldn't be talking about Seamus Callan retiring. Even TJ Reid just turned 33. You wouldn't be talking about him retiring. An awful lot of these lads are still carrying their team. And if you look at the placed balls, both frees and sideline cuts yesterday, Joe Canning, in an awful lot of ways, carried Galway too. But the flip side is, you could see, like, he could be carrying an injury at the moment that we don't know about, but he doesn't look like he's moving as freely as he normally would. And, you know, it was a tough night for him, and same with Aaron Gillan as well. I believe they were both held overnight in hospital for observation, and, you know, it was a concussion for Canning, but I think he's okay. But you just don't know what these guys are carrying, and he doesn't seem to me like he's moving as freely as he was. So if you look at the last number of years, obviously, I didn't think he should have been Hurler of the Year in 2017. So this isn't like some people seem to think I have some sort of an issue with him, but I don't. I didn't think he was Hurler of the Year in 2017, but he made some huge plays that obviously they wouldn't have won the All-Ireland without that. But you could say that for several players. 2018, I thought he was in Hurler of the Year form. So this is the whole thing. He was definitely in Hurler of the Year form there. 2019, up until he got injured against Waterford in the league semi-final when he hurt his groin, I thought he was in Hurler of the Year form. This year, he looked at the start in the league when we watched that game down at the Gaelic grounds against Limerick. Both thought he was good, but now, you know, in the Leinster campaign there, and in the All-Ireland series as well, 3 out of the 4 games he's held, or 2 out of the 4 games he's held scoreless from play, which isn't really kind of how he plays. He had a tough time yesterday before he went off injured. Wasn't involved in the game from open play at all. Again, brilliant from the place balls against Tipperary. Barry Heffernan won that. Won a couple of great puckouts against Wexford in the second half, but didn't have his greatest game. And Kilkenny as well. He scored 3 points, I think, but from play otherwise, he just doesn't look like he's moving around like himself. He's not barreling through the centre and soloing as he was. He's almost getting rid of the ball as quick as he gets his hands on it, with a couple of exceptions. There's always going to be upset, but it's just on
that chain as well. I think that's everyone's greatest fear. When you start striking the ball very, very quickly, it's like when you start getting blocked down or you start getting hooked, it's almost like that's a signal of you slowing down. So maybe that was one of the reasons why he struck the ball an awful lot quicker. Now, he's been doing that probably for the last 2 or 3 years, but definitely it was even more noticeable this year. No, he was He was blocked underneath the Cusick at one stage, maybe twice actually, and even with the Gearoid Hegarty incident as well. It's probably a mental kind of a thing as well. You would worry about that. It's a big thing when you start getting hooked and blocked.
Yeah, and if you're going to play with 5 in the forward line and Davy Burke is struggling to reach the pace, and then Joe Canning isn't the pace merchant these days, and twisting and turning is going to be tough for him as well. We talked about this with the Tipperary team as well, that some of the lads look laboured out in the field there. And then Conor Cooney isn't making any impact either. It's going to be very hard to get a lad who doesn't look 100% himself at the moment to get into it. And I think you have to look at the injury toll in the recent couple of years. And this is why, the comment came in asking, should Joe Canning retire? And you look at the injury sort of history in recent years, and he's always had a few different injuries. But 2016 against Tipperary, tore the hamstring off the bone in that All-Ireland semi-final going off before half-time. 2017, he got surgery on a knee injury. 2019, tore a groin adductor off the bone against Waterford, that league semi-final. 2020, earlier in the year, had a hand injury, no big deal. But 2020, again, yesterday, against Limerick, gets concussion. And he's done a couple of interviews in recent years talking about the injuries, and those 2 tears on his left side that I talked about, both the hamstring off the bone and the groin adductor. And he said just in October, so that's all my left leg, and I have a lot of imbalances, I suppose, throughout my body. It's like, if you break a hurl and fix it back together, yeah, it's fixed, but is it the same? No, it's not. So I don't think anybody is 100% in coming back from injury, especially at my age. I'm not a 21 or 22-year-old. I'm plus 10 of that, so when you get into it, it's a lot harder to recover after sessions. And I did an interview, a one-on-one interview with him in 2018 before the championship, and I was saying to him, what did he expect from the next 5 years, we'll say, give or take, playing with Galway. I think he was 29 going on 30 at that stage, and he goes, I don't know. I remember only last year I got a knee injury from the Leinster final, and I didn't really train too often between that and even the All-Ireland. I got an operation there before Christmas, and the surgeon said to me if I was 19 again, he'd probably give me a full knee. But because of my age, he did a job on me that might give me another couple of years, hopefully, so who knows. I'm taking this year as it comes, and to be straight about it, having come through the serious hamstring injury 2 years ago and then the knee injury last year, I'm taking it game by game. I'm just praying my body lets me hurl as long as I can. That's the honest truth. And you can certainly see a situation whereby Joe Canning plays next year and does very well for Galway. It's just, in this game yesterday against such a physical team as Limerick, you can notice that the Limerick lads are kind of marching out with the ball, and a couple of times, he ends up getting treatment twice, once having to get taken off. And I thought it looked like it was very difficult out there for him. And again, I can see him coming back next year and maybe clear up whatever injuries he has to some degree, and playing well in a certain amount of games. But maybe against the Limerick again, it might be tough again. So what do you think? I'm not looking to retire the man here at all. I can see him coming back and having a really good role, and the new season starts so soon. But what are your thoughts on it? That's just kind of a bit of background information, not just a blithe little comment of, yeah, retired again.
I think against 90 to 95% of opposition, he can still do serious damage, both from play and from place balls. But as you said, when the game has gone it's so much based around mobility and speed now, and like what you were saying there about Galway were playing obviously 5 forwards against 6. Generally, you're going to need 5 Duracell bunnies that are going to be able to run around and take on defenders and win frees and things like that. Joe's definitely probably not that type of player anymore, but we've said this before, and it's a big thing for me. When a guy can put over line balls, when a guy can put over frees, and when a guy can dictate a game from place balls, I still think careers can go on much longer. Like at club level, he could play well into his 40s if he wanted to, because he's still going to be able to do that. Barry Heffernan probably beat him in their duel from play against when they played Tipperary, but yet he was still that calm and influence down the home stretch from place balls. They might need to look at like putting him somewhere different. Like, would it be if they were playing orthodox and they put him back in full forward again, and kind of, maybe that's where he started, maybe that's where he finished as well. They moved him out around centre forward obviously in 2017 under Meagher and ended up winning the All-Ireland. They might need to look at playing him, maybe putting him somewhere else as well. I don't think there's no way Joe Canning will go out with a whimper like yesterday would have been. Saying that, if Galway had won the All-Ireland this year, would he have retired? Possibly, because I think he'd love to go out in his own terms. He'd obviously love to go out successful as well. But he's definitely obviously towards the latter stage, but I definitely think he'll come back next year. I wouldn't be that surprised if next year was his final year though, because I think he's smart enough as well, and it is a fear for players, particularly when you get a bit older, and even chatting to older lads in my own club. You don't want to, in horse racing terms, you don't want to be leaving time to go when they're actually over the top, if you know what I mean. And not that me being disingenuous. You want to go when you're still playing at a really high level. JJ Delaney's probably the classic example of that. He left while he was still wanted, and Joe or no one else will want it to be said that he hung around too long or he should have retired or anything like that. But I definitely think after the events of yesterday, hopefully, obviously, we're all hoping that the concussion is not serious and that he'll be able to get back, training over the coming months. But I definitely expect him to be back for 2021.
Do you think Shane O'Neill will be looking to revamp the team, or will he want to still build a forward line around Joe Canning, who did play full forward for about half of that first half? But again, there was the spare man back there, so it's going to be tough. Now, he lost a couple of 50-50 balls. Sean Finn won one of them off him anyway. But the point is, do you think Shane O'Neill still wants to build a forward line around him?
I don't think at that age profile that you should be building a forward line probably around a fella who has had a lot of injuries and potentially could have more injuries. I think be more probably, if he's thinking long term, you're thinking Conor Whelan, Brian Concannon, especially guys that showed up really, really well yesterday. Concannon in particular, when things were going badly, I thought he was absolutely outstanding and played in a different type of a role yesterday. Wasn't inside that much yesterday at all. Played out a lot more, and that's the type of energy you probably need against Limerick out in half hour. And you need this guy who's going to take on guys the whole time. So I think if O'Neill is building a forward line around anyone, it would probably be those two guys at this stage, and he'll take a fit Canning and absolutely maximise him. But I don't think he'll be building a forward line around him at this stage.
Yeah, and the thing is, Shane, it'll be Joe Canning's decision and no one else's. I don't think that Shane O'Neill, even if he decided, I mean, we're not trying to second guess him, but if he decided that I might just start introducing a lot of younger players and move out more than one of those particular players, he might look at a few of those and say maybe that's not the way forward. I think you couldn't make a case for dropping him as a manager, because he can still do the magical things he did yesterday. And just optically, if things go wrong and you've kind of made the decision to kind of cast him aside, you're in serious bother. It's like an extreme version of what Liam Cahill did this year when he decided that he wanted to move forward without Noel Connors and Maurice Shanahan. That would have been thrown in his face if he didn't do as well as he's done. People would be saying, what are you doing? A bit like Derek McGrath a few years ago as well, when he culled an awful lot of experienced players. So it's certainly not a decision that Shane O'Neill really has control of. So it's all about Joe Canning, and does his body do what he needs him to do to kick back the way he can. But a fair point about Brian Concannon. Set up a nice point for Cathal Mannion with a great burst down the left wing, got his 3 points. He was on Diarmaid Byrnes, was certainly unsettling him, and it kind of all fed into that 7-3 lead early on in the game. Conor Whelan, he was probably kept tabs on a bit more on the inside, but when he moved out, he was really good and got a couple of great scores in the second half.
He probably caused Declan Hannon to be that fatigued that he had to be taken off as well. He was going left and right. He was causing them a lot of trouble. And I'm glad you mentioned Cathal Mannion as well, because it can't be overstated. When the game was there to be won, Galway were missing two of their best players. And Mannion being off after 22 or 23 minutes, took away that guy that can kill a team from 100 yards. That guy who has the pace to take a ball in and go at lads as well. So they were kind of robbed of a good few options. Mannion, it wouldn't have been inconceivable for Mannion to get 4 or 5 yesterday from play. That's the type of player he is. They were definitely handicapped a small bit when he had to go off as early as he did. Yeah,
and he'd scored 1-3 against Tipperary, so he was in form. And you know what? Maybe the hamstring injury was something to do with having playing the 2 weeks before fairly energy-sapping games. It's probably always likely that somebody's going to pick up some sort of a knock somewhere along the line. I think
you kind of think they're invincible sometimes, and even Gallan going off yesterday injured and him being in hospital, and there's the complications of, I presume he would have had to drive home himself from Dublin last night, and he could have ended up crippled for 3 or 4 days as a result of that. So maybe they probably thought that was the best option for him. But we kind of look at some of these players, and it's particularly the Limerick, the beasts that they are, and we kind of think that they're almost infallible, and they're obviously not. But they'll be sore after that this morning. There was one interesting thing as well, I think, after John Kiley, like, he didn't double down, he probably triple down on the notion that he wants all the players outside of the 26 being allowed to go to the final. Probably even stronger quotes than the last time. He just said, if they don't leave the players come for the final, that would be a real travesty, an absolute travesty. That would be a massive mistake. It would be an unforgivable mistake if they don't leave the players come to the final. Unforgivable. But I hope they will, because level 5 restrictions are finished on Tuesday, so I'd hope that they will, for both counties' sakes and for the players' sakes on both sides. That's really important, and I hope they do. Imagine being on a Limerick squad for an All-Ireland final and watching the game at home, and imagine, like, I can't imagine how small you'd feel. You'd feel absolutely terrible.
You'd feel irrelevant. You'd feel irrelevant. Yeah. It's happened in situations where you like have an All-Ireland club final and you have lads changing in a different dressing room because you don't have enough room in the main dressing room. That kind of stuff does happen. And like Darren Gleeson, who's going to be leading Antrim out as manager in the Joe McDonagh final against Kerry, he said something similar. At the moment, you can bring 38 people in our group, and within that, you have your medical staff and your county board officials, and you obviously have to have us as selectors and the manager. We'd nearly prefer to be at home and to have the boys there who train and slogged it for all the year. We carry a small enough panel in comparison to what you'd be hearing. We have 32, and if any of them aren't there on that day, I will be personally devastated for them. I mean, I look at sports, different different codes all over the world, and I see maybe a rugby game there on a Saturday morning. You'd often have live games, and there's thousands of people in the crowd in those some Southern Hemisphere matches. You look at American football, like there's smallish crowds at some of them, biggish crowds at other ones, but they try to make it work. And maybe there's a concern here that if you open up a game for one set of people, why can't we have it for our minor match? Let's say if minor matches go ahead in January, or a county final that hasn't been played down in Laois or something like that. I get it, but then the flip side is there's going to be there was club matches on in public parks there over the last couple of months, and like we had crowds of like a couple of hundred around the field because the match was in a public park. So those things are going to happen, and they probably will happen again. But I don't see any reason why we can't have the proper protocols in place. Like if every panelist, which they already are doing, comes in a mask, sits apart, what's the issue? And this will be for the 4 teams because you've Antrim and Kerry as well. And also, I think the stadium holds 82,000. You can massively separate people out. I think everyone should get enough tickets for their direct family as well, their direct family members. I don't see why not. And like those people who all live together can sit in their pods. We all know that that's fine already. So, I mean, it fits 82,000. I mean, if in the grand scheme of things, 1,000 people are in there, between family, between the panels and the extended panels, and there won't even be anything like it. But if there was, sure, what about it? You can organise, you can put the protocols in place. It is a chasm of a stadium.
Yeah, people know now, Shane, as well. People are going to do exactly what they have to do just to get in to watch the match.
And everyone wear a mask. People are used to it now. You can't go to the shop without one, so everyone has one. Yeah,
exactly. And like, particularly now, the spotlight will be so much on them as well. They just want to be there. They just want to be there. Particularly the parents who have made all the sacrifices for all those players that are playing, and the extended panel who, John Kiley didn't present the Munster trophy until the Tuesday after the Munster final because those guys are as important as the guys that are actually out on the pitch. So there's absolutely no reason to me, in my head, why they can't be attending the final. They should be at the matches before now. It shouldn't be just coming to this that, Kiley and other managers are making passionate pleas, but hopefully common sense will prevail.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll move on to the other. Is there anything else to add on that Limerick performance? I feel like we talked a lot about Galway's limitations, but Limerick were brilliant. They're used to the ball. Like, obviously they missed their goal chances, but they created so much. I think 40. I had them down for 48 scoring opportunities. Now Galway won from the second water break on towards the end of the game, so there was a bit of nerviness, but still in all, there's no doubt in the class they have.
No, I think Limerick will be delighted. I think they will come into the final now with probably less pressure on. Wasn't another one of these unbelievable performances. It wasn't a tip-like performance from the Munster semi-final. They've loads of room for improvement. I think they're coming into it in a perfect position. I just think they wanted to get over the line yesterday, and they did. So like, you don't need to blow anyone away in a semi-final. There's no trophies handed out for semi-finals. They're exactly where they want to be. And like, can I see David Reedy missing 1-3 if he comes on the next day? No. Can I see Graham Mulcahy missing that pickup that he missed? No. Can I see Will O'Donoghue, who's usually so good around the ball? 5 or 6 times the ball was around him and he missed the pickup straight away, and I know conditions were tricky. I just don't see those things happening the next day. So I think they have a lot of room for improvement, which I think is a positive for Kylie and Limerick.
Yeah, absolutely. The semi-final on Saturday night was absolutely thrilling. Waterford beat Kilkenny 227 to 223 for a finish. At half time, it didn't look like this was possible. It felt to me like, oh, here's Waterford again, you know, SH1T'ing the course when it matters the most. But no, they didn't. From 2-11 to 10 points down at half time, they absolutely took over the game. And you know what? As the game was going on, you'd almost think this is going to become nervy for Waterford towards the end. Kilkenny are going to make a big comeback here. But just Waterford just grew and grew and grew. There was a run of like, was it 111 to 3 points, maybe it was 4 points. But they just completely took the game over and physically ran Kilkenny off the road.
They did. Obviously, that scene in front of Liam Cahill, I think it was Conor Gleeson. He was only just on the pitch. He got in that kind of big tackle, and like, you love to see it. You love to see a manager giving it the big one, giving it that sort of passion. And as well as that, and I know we'll probably bring up stats in a minute. The amount of puckouts, I don't know if it was just because Fagan was that side a lot of the time, but the amount of puckouts in the second half in particular that went down the Hogan stand side, right in front of Cahill. It's almost like horse the ball down there in front of our manager and we'll show him what we're made of. Like, that's very simplistic, obviously, and I'm sure that wasn't what they were doing, but that's almost what it looked like. The amount of joy they got. In the second half there, the physicality they brought to it, having been so nervy earlier on. They were so nervy earlier on. Like, poor old Jake Dillon got pulled off after the first quarter. You feel sorry for him. I think there was probably part of it was probably fatigue over recent weeks, and he was just a bit off. Even Fagan took 2 shots early on, 2 kind of panicked kind of shots that you wouldn't maybe expect them to be taken, but then like thereafter in the second half they were just absolutely outstanding, and they brought a level of physicality to the game that Kilkenny just were not able to live with. Kilkenny were only hanging on, and Waterford were still mad for work up until that. Right, like if the game had gone under 15 minutes, like Waterford would have beaten them out the game. Like that's just the fact of it, because Waterford were so ravenous for work, and there was no stopping them. There was absolutely no stopping them. One of the most kind of complete halves of hurling I've nearly ever seen.
And you'd have to wonder, has Liam Cahill, is his team changed and evolving now? You mentioned kind of Galway. We've no idea what their team would be for the final. Whereas Waterford have a fairly settled look. You might make a change or two. Limerick have a very settled look. Galway and Kilkenny both didn't have a settled look. I think Neil Montgomery might come in for the final. It didn't really happen for Jake Dillon. And like that was something that I was saying in the preview show, that he needs to take care of the ball a little bit better, because in Croke Park you're going to get the ball taken off you pretty quickly if you don't look after it very, very quickly. And I'm going to bring up some stats from a Twitter account called a Roy Orbison Tattoo Podcast. But the name of it aside, it just talks about the second half masterclass on their own puckouts for Waterford. So you can see it on the screen here. There's kind of a pitch map of where they're at. And just to read out the bullet point, Waterford's second half puckouts, 14 of 17, which is 82%. And this wasn't primarily to uncontested men in their half. They scored 2-6 directly off their own puckouts in the second half. And look at the puckout battle zone they dominated, which was in front of their manager, Liam Cahill. And it's pretty clear. They were huge at that. I mean, Jack Fagan, what a performance in the air. Like you talked about a couple of those wides at the start, and maybe that's even just getting to know Croke Park. It is a different feeling to playing anywhere else. Like you strike the ball and it feels like the first couple that you drop short, you realise pretty quickly, alright, you really have to blast the ball here. There's some illusion of the eye with the stands behind or whatever. You have to blast the ball to make sure you make the distance. Did you find that the first time or two that you go out in Croke Park, it's a bit unusual?
It is really unusual. Yeah. the goals are basically much further away than you probably think they are. They cause you to probably put more of an effort into the strike, and obviously the harder you're probably striking it, the more likely you are to make a mistake. But all those little mistakes, there was a lot of new guys probably out there for Waterford, maybe that hadn't they obviously played, minor finals, maybe a handful of them, but there was a lot of new guys there maybe that hadn't played in Croke Park too often, but like someone like Shane McNulty definitely bedded in fairly well. Like that point he got in the second half for a corner back coming out, and that basically like that was exemplified like what Waterford were doing. Like nobody had any shackles on in that second half. They were just going for it. And there was an interesting tweet put out by the psychologist Kate Kirby. She's done a lot of work with various sports teams, and she was just kind of asking. I definitely think it's something worth going into maybe before the final. Are like underdogs more likely to be able to express themselves now when there's less pressure in the build up to a game, less pressure the day of a game, less kind of noise? They may be able to go out and express themselves a bit more. I definitely think this is the reason why we're probably seeing even higher scores in hurling. That, and allied with the fact that when a ball goes wide or goes over the bar, there's no reason for the ball not to be poked out straight away again. There's no noise or anything like that. I definitely think Waterford, and even in football, Cavan and probably Tipperary as well, teams that there just seems to be less pressure. They're able to go and express themselves a bit more, and I definitely think Waterford would feed into that as well. Like there was no shackles on them in that second half the other day, and as I said, there was no white line fever. They were only going to go and win the game by more the longer it went on.
Yeah, when Martin Keoghan knocked in that first goal and then TJ Reid got another one a few minutes later, there was something like 13 minutes between the goals, something like that. You would have thought, yeah, that's when the crowd will get on your back, and then all of a sudden Watford is to try and get a puck out, and like the noise around you and your body temperature flies up, and all of a sudden your brain becomes scrambled. That's not happening. And there's a few.
And you make a mistake, Shane, or Jack Fagan hits a wide, and they're like, "Oh no, I could be taken off here." Yeah, but that's gone now.
The whole crowd goes, "Oh, that sort of thing." That is gone. So from that point of view, I agree that the crowd not being there can help an underdog in that sense, because the occasion won't get on them as much. But a lot of the time, isn't the problem with a team that hasn't played on the big stage before, hasn't been in an All-Ireland semi-final or final. A lot of these Waterford lads have, but a lot of them haven't. But a lot of it is you end up playing the game in the couple of days before the match actually happens. So you're at home, you're overthinking it, whatever. See, that is still there. So Waterford have dealt with the occasion. They still came out and performed. They didn't waste any mental energy, as far as I can see, because they were the ones who were kicking on stronger and stronger as the game went on. So they didn't do that classic error of playing the game before it ever happened. So from that point of view, I think Kate Kirby might have a point, but not entirely because of that factor and the fact that they weren't spent.
It's like Dream Team. Do you remember Dream Team back
in
the day?
Harchester United.
Frank Patcham, play the game, not the occasion, son.
Yeah. Who else do I remember from that? Linda Block, your man Fletcher up front, and Armando, the striker, can't remember. Luis Amor Rodriguez.
Luis Amor Rodriguez.
Yeah, our younger viewers will be wondering what the hell we're going on about, but it was this old soap that was based on a fantasy soccer team called Harchester United, and they used to take actual clips of maybe Man United or Liverpool teams with red jerseys and sort of make them look purple or whatever, and then cut in pictures of the actor actually celebrating. It was ridiculous.
And the classic intro to it was sponsored by Brill Cream. It was Dream Team with Brill Cream. Style and control.
Come here, you made a point there just before we started. Are Kilkenny being left behind physically? I did kind of talk about the size profile for the last couple of weeks, that the half-back line, fair enough, they had like Tommy Walsh, who's 5'9" or 10 or whatever, and he was like brilliant in the air. But you had like Brian Hogan was huge, JJ Delaney was brilliant in the air. They used to have like monsters in the forward line. Martin Comerford, Shefflin's a big guy. Probably name plenty more. They always had a big forward line. Michael Fennelly bursting lads in midfield. Derek Ling's not small. Michael Rice isn't a small shy player either. So they don't have that same size profile across the board, and they also chose to not start two of their most physical players, Wally Walsh and reigning all-star Colin Fennelly.
Yeah, imagine like 10 years ago if someone had said to us, like, in 10 years' time you might actually question are Kilkenny, being left behind physically or been bullied physically by other teams, because they were the ones that bullied for so long. But it has changed an awful lot now. It's said it's so much about speed and mobility. And like nobody was able to stick with Caleb Lyons when he galloped the other day. Caleb Lyons, who made a couple of silly mistakes and was a bit frustrating at times, but by God, there was some stages where he was just absolutely unbelievable and nobody could live with him. But Kilkenny just don't seem to have that mobility, don't seem to have that pace maybe that a lot of other teams have. I know Martin Keown was struggling a bit with Lyons, but geez, I wouldn't have been taking him off. I definitely wouldn't have been taking him off. I would have tried him somewhere else, even if it was inside or even on the other wing or in the centre, because he does bring an awful lot of pace and mobility to it.
Well, he'd scored 1-1 and he'd set up 2 scoring chances, one of which was scored. So, yeah, I mean, when some of your other forwards are barely feeling the weight of it, I'd try and find somewhere else for him.
Yeah, 100%. Like when you put the Waterford team in terms of mobility up against the Kilkenny team, there's only one winner. Like with Caleb Lyons, Jack Fagan, Stephen Bennett, who is just playing crazy hurling. Like he got a point in the first half the other day where he got the ball out around, I'd say about 60, 70 yards from goal, and he just soloed in, and he was so cool, struck it off his hurl. The goal obviously was a game changer. So happy to see the drop puck back in hurling. Even Martin Keown lifting the ball up and pulling on it then as well. The drop puck is back.
And Jake Morris did it against Limerick as well, the one-handed flick on the ground. But
and even there was a bit, Keane Lynch pulled on a ball yesterday in the All-Ireland semi-final, which I couldn't believe it. Now that was rash. There was no reason to do that. Aaron Gallan actually pulled and broke a hurl off a lad at one stage too, which was a real kind of throwback. But like Stephen Bennett, a guy who had been periphery, you would say, on the Waterford team in recent years, just physically looks to have gotten a clean bill of health with injuries. Like he was just, Kilkenny had no answer to his pace, no answer to his direct running. Even like Deise Hutchinson, who in fairness, there was a good job done on Deise by Conor Delaney, but when the quality of ball improved going in, they just weren't able to live with their pace. And Kilkenny, I don't know, are they going to have to, maybe is there going to have to be a lot more faith placed in younger players that are able to bring more speed and kind of mobility to the table, because they were just totally overran by Waterford at different stages on Saturday night.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with too much of that. I'm trying to think now with that Waterford team and Stephen Bennett. Like, have you ever seen a guy go on such mazy solo runs and then trot around as if it didn't take a funk out? Like it didn't bother him at all.
It was crazy, yeah. Now I listened to the post-match interview with him. He was still puffing 10 minutes after the match. So while it mightn't have looked like he was like dying on the pitch, he was definitely feeling the effects of it after. But like he's in Hurler of the Year form, Shane. Like he's on a different planet at the moment. Yeah. And like I know Austin Gleeson will get probably a lot of the credit. And again, he was like his second half performance, he just totally stood up when he was needed. Like we've asked, like, when is Austin Gleeson maybe going to stand up for Waterford in a really big game? There was no 14-on-15 against Cork in the All-Ireland semi-final to stand up. This was 15-on-15. This was Waterford down by 7 points at half-time, and he came out and was absolutely outstanding. But just back to Bennett for a second. Bennett for me is probably favourite for Hurler of the Year at the moment, just because I just don't really remember him having even a quiet spell in a game so far. He's literally, there was a couple of maybe misplaced passes against Clare, but apart from that, his graph has been so high the whole way through.
Is it between Stephen Bennett, Tony Kelly and Gearoid Hegarty for Hurler of the Year?
The odds would suggest that Tony Kelly has absolutely zero chance.
I say it flew out to 25 to 1 or something ridiculous.
Yeah, the thing is because of the recency bias, and teams that get to a final and semi-final are going to be the one. Like the Hurler of the Year will not be someone that's out of a championship, even though like even someone like TJ Reid is probably deserves to be in the conversation as well, just for how consistent he was too. He's a guaranteed all-star. You're probably looking at between Bennett and Hegarty, but just say Tom Morrissey delivers another one of those 4 or 5 points in the All-Ireland final, he's definitely in the conversation as well. But it's funny, it's probably not the players that we would have thought of maybe beforehand. If Waterford are going to go well, Tyke de Bourke is in the conversation too, in fairness, because he thundered into it in the second half. If he was to have if he was to repeat his second half performance over the course of 70 minutes, he wouldn't be far off either.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, Stephen Bennett, when you consider in and out of the team, injuries, not really nailing down his position, he's really coming good now. And we've talked about it before. This is sort of the backbone of the All-Ireland minor team for 2014, the under-21 team that won the All-Ireland in 2016. And you asked the question last week, was it too soon for this Waterford team? And
I got an emphatic answer.
Yeah, well, you got an emphatic answer from me last week, but you got a more emphatic answer on the field. It really isn't. Like, the thing I loved about what Austin Gleeson did is he went around bullying players. He was standing lads up in the tackle. He was pushing them backwards. He was basically Waterford's version of Hegarty, and just like Hegarty, 4 points to wash it down as well. He was exceptional, and like the very end of the game, he had chased the defender out. He was trying to get a hook in, and the ball was turned over, and Jamie Barron hit him a ball over the top of a player, and he kind of turned around. He looked like he was out on his feet, knocked it over, and then he's just down on all fours as the final whistle goes. The game ended, and he's too tired to even celebrate. That's what you want to see from Austin Gleeson.
That is what you want to see. And like Liam Cahill has been, that's what he's been looking for him from the very, very start. And that's probably why he pulled them off the last couple of days, because he delivered 2 or 3 points in both those games, but he hadn't maybe emptied himself as much. Like this was all the physical conditioning, all the dietary work that he did throughout the summer to get himself in this unbelievable shape. This was all of that kind of coming to fruition. And like, we won't touch on the All-Ireland final too much, but Waterford are going into the All-Ireland final in a different position now. Like Waterford are going into the All-Ireland final now thinking that they can actually win. Did they actually think they could win the Munster final? Probably not. And Stephen Bennett kind of backed up that theory as well. Just on Stephen Bennett as well, just goes to show you that anyone that thinks if you do an interview or anything the week of a match you won't play well or there's more pressure on you, it's absolute balderdash. It's in no way true whatsoever. He was absolutely outstanding.
Yeah, Tony Kelly did one the week before that performance against Wexford as well. It's absolutely nonsense. Once the whistle goes, none of that matters. Where are Kilkenny at, and where is Brian Cody at with this team? Now, first of all, I can say that Liam Cahill's victory over Brian Cody will have gone down very well in his native Tipperary. That's one thing for sure. And by the way, you also mentioned the way he was getting excited on the sideline, giving it all the fist pumps and all of that. Like, they kept on showing slow-mo replays of him doing that in the Sunday game last night. It's amusing to watch, and I don't mean laughing at it, but like just to see a guy that into it and having it in the slow motion where they're like, it was entertaining to watch. But what a huge victory for him. And season 1, building on his underage success, I mean, like, his trajectory is just up. But where are Kilkenny at? Because TJ Reid is now 33, Richie Hogan is 32. And you couldn't necessarily say that, Pádraig Walsh is probably 28, turn 29. He's obviously got plenty of hurling left in him. But that defence was ran off the road. I think the entire team was run off the road for a finish. They've had a couple of tough All-Irelands, 2016, 2019, capitulating in the second half. Capitulated in the second half here. Capitulated in the second half against Dublin, losing a 16-point lead, albeit having the mettle to turn it around. Ropey against Galway, turned it around. So there's a couple of things in the plus bracket and a couple of things in the minus bracket.
Yeah, a lot of uncharacteristic Kilkenny things. Like, when have Kilkenny ever lost a lead? Like a 7-point lead or a 16-point lead, that has never really happened before. And I do think the crowd definitely does feed into that, and the whole, Kilkenny are on top now, if the crowd are there, and it's almost like they're going to kick on or whatever. I definitely do think that is helping teams. It was interesting with Cody. Sportsfile got a great shot of him in splendid isolation, walking back up the steps of Croke Park. They didn't use the dressing room, which I thought was an interesting one.
They haven't used it any day.
Yeah, but it was particularly interesting the other day. Like, I don't know, does that have, it's just something different that we're doing, obviously, but they got a shot of him going back up the steps of Croke Park, and you're obviously kind of think, when you see the shot, you're like, is this potentially Cody exiting stage left? He maybe added a bit of fuel to that with some of his quotes after. This is only me being a bit cryptic maybe, but he just said you're disappointed for the result and you don't start thinking about what happened maybe a few weeks ago, as in the Leinster final win. The reality is Kilkenny hurling moves on, Kilkenny hurling goes on, and next year comes very quickly, and that's the reality. Kilkenny, you could say in one sentence, Kilkenny hurling moves on. Does it move on with or without Brian Cody? And then he says, and then he also says next year comes very quickly, and that's the reality. So maybe he's saying in one instance Kilkenny hurling moves on and potentially I move on. Then he's saying, well, next year's nearly here, so I'm going to go next year again. So
he'd have to be dragged out of there. There is no way that man is going to step away from that job this year, next year, or I think as long as he's able to do it, he will stay. The question is, you know, Kilkenny have gone 5 years without an All-Ireland now, and they look, you know, like people were saying, won a Leinster title, you're one game away from an All-Ireland final, you were in an All-Ireland final last year. But the truth of it is, you were ran off the road in the second half here. The truth of it was, I mean, you were beaten out the gate in an All-Ireland final last year, 2016, beaten out the gate in an All-Ireland final. You can't ignore this. So are they now in a situation where they're getting further away from winning an All-Ireland when TJ Reid, who's still brilliant, is turning 33, Richie Hogan turning 32, they're dropping Colin Fennelly, they're dropping Wally Walsh, maybe he's not fully certain of his team. So, like, does it feel like it's going to go down the Mickey Hart road, whereby he won those 3 All-Irelands, Cody's far more, he won 3, and then it took 12 years of, at times, absolute mediocrity with some of those teams that Mickey Hart had, and I think getting hammered by Kerry and Killarney towards the start of the 2011 or 2012, and 2012 I think, and then 2014 losing at home to an average Armagh team, a decent Armagh season though, and then, you know, it goes on and lurches on and on and on. See, you've a number of guys who'd obviously be good successors to Cody in the long run, and maybe they feel they could move the team a different direction. But like, Brian Cody's done so much and he has so much credit in the bank, he'll be able to decide. But how long do they have to win? You know, can they go without winning All-Ireland before the locals get a little bit restless? Or is that airy-fairy talk?
Yeah, I think it's airy-fairy enough, because
all of it, like, are they further away from winning All-Ireland than they were before?
They probably are, but that's more to do with probably with the personnel that they have, and the fact that they've won probably a league in 18, beat Limerick last year, won a Leinster this year. With that, if anything, to me, that's probably even more credit in the bank for Cody in many instances. And I know you and other Tipperary folk are talking about the drive for 5 and the fact that they're 5 years without an All-Ireland win now. I'm sure it's
not like he has no success underage coming through. Like, they've won 2 of the last 3 Leinster under 2021 titles. So it's not like there's no talent there, and they still have an awful lot of players in there who have All-Ireland titles from 2015.
Yeah, but if you're putting Kilkenny up against Limerick and you're thinking, you know, age profile, everything, who's going to win the game, you're probably thinking that Limerick are going to probably win 9 times out of 10.
Should they bet Limerick last year?
They did beat Limerick last year, but if you're like, who would you take in the morning? Would you take Limerick, Waterford, or Kilkenny? Who would you take out? You wouldn't take Kilkenny. If you were ranking them now, be 1, 2, 3, probably Limerick, Waterford, Kilkenny. So they're still achieving quite a lot with what they have. And I think Waterford probably went after TJ in the second half the other day. TJ was still able to do some crazy things. John Donnelly deserves a massive mention as well. He was brilliant, particularly when things weren't going well. But this is probably not the best Kilkenny squad they've had. They're probably still moving around, and when TJ goes, you'd probably have a bit of worry for them, would you? When TJ goes, who's going to step up? Obviously, they were missing Adrian Mullen this year. He's going to come back into the fold, but that job is Cody's for as long as he wants it to be. And I think he'd be smart enough as well to step aside when he thinks he can't change or, you know, enforce his kind of law on them and turn them into All-Ireland winners. I think he probably would have stepped away in 16 or after 16 or after 17 if he didn't think he could turn it around. He turned it around to some extent in those years, and they've still had big wins within those years. But there's things happening now that haven't happened with Kilkenny teams before, and that's strange.
If you've been manager of a team for 22 years and basically the entire country or county is idolising you and deferring to you on everything, the idea of stepping away from that, you know, if you're retired from your job and this kind of thing makes you the centre of the county, which is a hurling mad county, I think that's almost impossible to walk away from if it becomes your identity. And like, how can it not become your identity? How do you walk away from it? So whether it's going good, bad or indifferent, and I'd love to get people's comments on this, because obviously people will slate me. They'll say you're from Tipperary, blah blah blah, you're trying to dance on Kilkenny's heads. Tipperary have had a bad season, but like, you know, it does become your identity. I think it clouds your judgment of when you should and shouldn't walk away.
Potentially could, to be fair. I suppose it's the sort of thing we might only know whenever it all finishes up, or like will it become a case where imagine it came to the case like it did in Tyrone, where Brian Cody looks for another year and Kilkenny don't give him another year. Like maybe that'll happen. I don't know, but it's definitely going to be interesting over the next couple of years. I still think like our Kilkenny potentially could be overachieving with what they have at the moment as well. I know they have like Owen Murphy's probably, I would still say, he's the best goalkeeper in the country, even though he underperformed the other night. And they have TJ, two of the best hurlers in the country. But like outside of that, there's a lot of new faces been brought in. There's been a lot of turnover in the last 4 or 5 years. They don't have probably the squad depth of, you know, a Waterford, probably even of a Tip, of a Limerick. So when Cody steps away, I don't know. And I thought it would all end in tears, being honest with you. After 17, I thought when they were beaten by Waterford, I said he's going to stay there too long and it could potentially all end in tears. The last 3 years have brought, you know, a Leinster title, a league title, an All-Ireland final appearance, another All-Ireland semi-final this year. Maybe we're judging them harshly based on what he has done and what they have done over the last while.
But there's no doubt that Leinster is the weaker of the two provinces at the moment. I mean, number one, they're buttressed by a Connacht side. So if it's going to be knockout this year and knockout next year, it's harder to come through Munster. I don't think there's a doubt about that. So if Kilkenny were told you have to beat the winners of Laois and Dublin, who of the 10 Liam McCarthy teams were ranked down near the lower end of it this year, then to beat a Galway team against the manager in his first year and probably a few players that are struggling for form, etc., to get to an All-Ireland semi-final, you'd think, okay, that's makeable even if Kilkenny aren't at their very best. And like you think now, outside of Kilkenny, no Leinster team has won the All-Ireland since 1998, your own boys, I believe. And it just and I mean, obviously we know the plight of Offaly now, so that kind of says something. Whereas the flip side is 2016 Munster team Tipperary, 2017 Galway Connacht team, 2018 you've got Limerick Munster team, 2019 Munster team in Tipperary, and 2020 it's going to be Munster team again, whether it's Limerick or Waterford. So there's a chance of getting back to an All-Ireland final and all that, because you should have a slightly more favourable route. Munster hurling looks like it's on top, you know. And the thing is, a few years ago it was thought of Munster hurling as Fancy Dan hurling, but there's nothing Fancy Dan about Limerick. Well, they have all the skills, but they'll batter you as well. And Waterford are sort of shaping up in that vein too. So, anything else on that before we finish up on that particular semi-final?
No, it was just magic, wasn't it? It was magic, like, and yet another example of how unbelievable hurling can be. And I just, like, as I said, half time people were talking about how, you know, this is just mundane. Kilkenny, good luck and thanks. Kilkenny are going to pull away here, and then Waterford produced this unbelievable second half performance that leaves them going into a final in a different position, and with the benefit of 17 under their belt and the defeat in 17 under their belt. So yeah, cannot wait for 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, not to mention they have an extra day's recovery, which could be a crucial thing. You know, we talked about Aaron Gillan and his back, the knock he got to his back. By the way, one point I'd also make for Kilkenny, it was the 71st minute. They were 2 points behind. Jerry Aylward was clearly fouled as far as I was concerned. He ended up hitting the wide. That would have brought it back to a point. Win a puck out. I mean, obviously Jack Fagan had been lording it with the puck outs. Actually, he'd been taken off at that stage. But, you know, you just don't know at that stage. And after that, Waterford hit 3 out of the next 4 points. Conor Gleeson, Tyke de Burka and Austin Gleeson. So you just never know. I mean, it's fine margins. It so often is. Like, the Kilkenny team might have been under the caution in the second half, but they were still going, and, you know, in some ways they might feel a little bit unfortunate. But anyway, we'll look forward to talking more about the Liam McCarthy and the final in the coming days and weeks. The Joe McDonagh Cup, round 5 was going ahead. Now we know that Antrim and Kerry are going to be in the final, but just to run through a couple of the results that happened at the weekend. Westmeath 1-21, Carlow 2-13, and Colin Bonner has stood down after that game. So just some of the scorers in that game. Angus Clark scored 13 points for Westmeath, Cormac Boyle got 4, and Niall Mitchell got the goal for Carlow. Chris Nolan, who's had a great scoring season, he had 5 points, 2 of those were frees. John Nolan got 1-1, and John Michael Nolan, he also got 1. Kevin MacDonald came up with 4 points. Then in the other game, Antrim, they scored 230 against Meads 310. Michael Bradley, he shone, scoring 8 points, and free taker Kieran Clark, he hit 12. So that's that final coming up. From me, James Kelly and Stephen Morris got the goals along with Damien Healy. So any particular thoughts on those two games?
No, just Brendan Murtagh and Owen Price retired for Westmeath in the wake of that, and obviously Bonner walking away. Probably sad end for Bonner, because he'd made massive strides with Carlow, obviously winning 2A, winning the ring, winning the first McDonagh as well, and having a good run in Leinster. But maybe just it was weird. Marty Kavanagh wasn't hitting freeze rating the other day as well. He didn't score actually for Carlow the other day. It's just a really kind of they're after limping to the end of the year now, when maybe people thought they probably would have been in a final. But interesting final between Antrim and Kerry, both with the winner going into Leinster. And obviously the Lory Cup was on Saturday as well. I know you were in for a good bit of it. I unfortunately wasn't there, but great that they were in Croke Park before the All-Ireland semi-final on Saturday evening.
Yeah, a storming second half from Louth saw them win this by 11 points. John Duffy, what a penalty he scored for Fermanagh. He's a big burly wing forward, and he just hits beautiful frees and place balls. But he put a penalty into the top corner, and it was magic. Darren Gagan, he knocked over 9 frees. Andrew Mackin, he was the hero of the day with 2-1. And David Kettle scored a couple of points as well. And just to add, the Camogie, that was on telly at the weekend, the two semi-finals. Kilkenny beat Cork 2-10 to 1-11. And then Tipperary lost to Galway 1-11 to 8 points after having a good start in that game. So
Jane, my ring record Mar Cup predictions. Predicted Louth would win. Predicted Donegal would win. Imagine to say that Offaly were the ones that let me down in the ring.
Who knew? Because they've been so reliable for so long at this stage.
Well, you know what I mean. They were raging hot favourites.
Yeah. All right, we've it all said. And just a reminder again, we're brought to you by orgaretro.com. If you want to get these jerseys or any other class retro jerseys, go to orgaretro.com and put in the promo code OurGame and you get 15% off.